fix your heating or your water, or your plumbing, and have them repay you for having to live somewhere else. So it has more things like that as opposed to saying you can't do things. And there's some things you can't do, and I don't remember the whole law already well enough. But this is more about what kinds of protections you can be sure you'll be guaranteed as a tenant and also as a landlord. I mean, there are some things that, like, your landlord can't help the fact that the guy who lives in the next house is loud, you know, so it's not really his fault kind of thing. Just so you're not holding landlords to things they can't make a difference on either. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I've been going through the list of bills.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
There's a Senate-sponsored bill concerning repeal of the rapid screen program to identify high-emitting motor vehicles. And I think that's a really great program that saves us a lot of money because people don't have to go to the emissions testing facility if they've gone past one of those drive-past emission stations on the entrance ramps for 6th Avenue. And they want to get rid of that, and I just think that's a terrible waste of money.
So I think, and I'd have to read this, and so we can go over that in a moment, where bills are in the process. But this bill is a Senate bill. Senator Steve King is the primary sponsor, and Senator Lois Toptrap is a co-sponsor. And that's a meaningful thing because King is a Republican from the Western Slope, and Toptrap is a Democrat who's a strong union supporter from the Adams County area. So, and then the House sponsor is a Democrat, McCloskey, who's running for Congress in CV6. So I read this and I say, King, Toptrap, McCloskey, this probably has some merit to it because otherwise you wouldn't have bipartisan support like that. And then the other thing you could see here is that it was assigned to the Transportation Committee. Now, Senator Schaefer is being really good this year about trying to really assign bills where they should rightfully go. But if you see a bill and it has something to do with transportation and it's going to state veterans and military affairs, that usually means that the bill has to have a hearing, but they don't want it to make it out of committee. So this has two clues to me. It has a Republican and a Dem together, Dem in the House, and it's going to transportation. And I bet this man can tell us what the bill does. Do you know?
No, I don't,
Oh, okay.
but I just had a comment when you had a chance. On the mobile sources emissions testing, automobile technology has advanced so much that as a portion of any part of the pollution in the area, it's not attributable greatly to cars. It's become a redundant program or an unnecessary program. It's obsolete. The whole thing should just be abandoned.
I think that's what this bill does.
Not to send you to the garage that, you know, the one or two testing places that they have where the people have never driven your car and they break the key off to start with and wreck the transmission nets. They should just flat eliminate the whole mobile testing program. Now our stationary sources, you know, they still need the regulations.
Right, and so I have to read through this, but my recollection was that this this like drive-by program had a provision where if they tested you high, you like had to go to a mechanic or something before you came to be rechecked, and they found out that it created a lot of false positives. So it was falsely identifying cars as having too high of an emissions. And so what they're going to do is change it that if it says you're okay, you're okay. But if it, and they'll give you something saying you're okay, but if it doesn't say you're okay, they won't make you go and do something more dramatic until you get retested at a stationary site. So that's what I vaguely remember. I could be wrong, and I can take a look at it and get back to you later. If you want to put your email on here, I will do that. Thank you.
In newer cars, though, like I've had my vehicle for about 4 years now, and I'm still apparently being exempted from doing any of that.
Yeah, so maybe
And
that
so
you've
there's something
driven,
in there, I guess, about ages of.
No, but you may have driven by one of those
Okay.
things,
And
and
it
they
wouldn't
thought
say that
you
on
were
the card.
okay, so they're not requiring you to get the emissions test.
But they're not telling
So-
you that that's why.
Right.
Okay.
But what they were finding was that too many of the ones that they were testing as high weren't really high in the end. So they're changing that doesn't become an automatic, you have to see a car repairman. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to say that I really endorse the Good Samaritan thing for drug overdoses, and maybe you could tell us where that is in the process. And then the second thing I wanted to ask you about was this thing about preventing people being deterred from voting. I don't know about that at all.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to start with the second thing because it just so happens that Elena Nunez from Common Cause is here, and I'm running the voter bill with Common Cause. They brought it to my attention and asked if I'd be interested in running that legislation. And so why don't you go ahead and come up and talk to them about the bill, and then we'll get to your second question.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. So the goal of Senate Bill 147 is to prohibit false information in elections, because right now it is against Colorado law to intimidate a voter. So you can't go to the polling place and threaten people that if they vote, you're going to hurt them. That's against the law. It's against the law to lie to voters about campaign material, to say, oh, a ballot issue or a candidate said this or that if they didn't. But there's actually nothing in Colorado law that makes it against the law to tell the voter the wrong information about the time, place, and manner of an election. So this is like what we've seen primarily in other states, but robocalls that say there are going to be a lot of people on election day, so to cut down on the lines, Republicans vote on Tuesday, Democrats vote on Wednesday, when really the election's on Tuesday. Or there was actually an instance in Pueblo County in 2008 where the night before the election there was a robocall that went out that told voters that their polling places had switched, even though it hadn't. So what this bill does is actually make that a crime. And then the second piece that's really important is it requires corrective action. So if we find out that there was misinformation being spread, the Attorney General or the District Attorney, depending on how it plays out, would have the authority to coordinate a response. So it's not up to the county clerk who, if this happens 2 days before the election, is setting up polling places and getting ballots ready and things like that, to have to decide how to respond. Law enforcement will try to prosecute if they can figure out who's behind it, but then also put out the correct information so voters in the community know, no, really, the election's on Tuesday, you need to go vote if you want to participate, or call this number to find out where you're supposed to go vote. So this is really designed to be a preventative measure, knowing that 2012 obviously is going to be a huge election for Colorado. We're going to see a lot of outside money. Some are saying $1 billion in spending here in Colorado. And we want to make sure that if there's any of the dirty tricks that we're seeing elsewhere, that they don't keep people from voting. So the bill has its first hearing in committee on Wednesday, and we'll see how it proceeds from there. But really the goal is to make sure that voters have accurate information, and if someone tries to deceive them, we can hold them accountable and correct the information.
This bill isn't doing anything about the voter ID stuff.
No, that's a different bill. There is a bill, House Bill 1111, which has been introduced that would require photo ID for voting. Common Cause is opposing that bill along with many other groups because there are a lot of people who don't have photo ID, and the bill is really just a step towards making it much more difficult for them to vote. So we expect that bill will make it through the House, and then we are working very consciously to make sure that it does not get through the Senate.
Just out of curiosity, who doesn't have a photo ID? I have it on my library card.
About, the national estimates are about 10% of all voters. They tend to be seniors, people with disabilities, minorities, some young voters, and in many instances, if you need to get a photo ID and you've got your birth certificate and other documentation, you can go and do that. But if you were born at home and didn't get a birth certificate originally, it can be a real barrier. Or if the name, which is often a case for people who are divorced or have been adopted, where there have been name changes in their life, the name that's on one document doesn't match the others. So it's actually incredibly difficult then to cut through all of that and get a photo ID from the government. So we work with the Colorado Lawyers Committee, and they have an ID project that actually helps people get IDs. And in some cases, they're able to do it and it takes no time. In others, it can take 300 hours of a lawyer working with the state to get all of the documentation in place so people will have IDs. But nationally, it's about 10%, and we expect the numbers in Colorado are about the same.
Plus, a lot of people can't afford to take a half day off and go to the
Right.
the motor vehicle department and sit there.
Right.
And it's not any photo ID, it's government issued photo
Correct.
ID. And yeah, and actually I have a daughter who's disabled and she'll be 18 in November, and I went to get her passport now that I'm still her guardian, because I was told that would be an issue for her later to get an ID if I didn't get it now, and then now I can renew her passport every 10 years now that I have that. But again, if I hadn't been warned, I might have been caught unawares. And I actually use au pairs a lot from overseas to come and work with me and help with my daughter. and they have to get a social security card and then a driver's license for my insurance to cover them. You would not believe how hard it is to get a driver's license in Colorado. We've gone back 5 or 6 times that we didn't have the right documents. It wasn't signed in original ink or whatever it might be. I mean, it's really hard to get a photo ID now. I think that's sort of backlash from the Patriot Act, and it's so really pretty difficult to get one.
What committee is 147 going to first?
It's going to Senate State Affairs.
State
But
Affairs and Military
yes.
Affairs, but in a good way.
Yes,
Because
and
that's where it belongs.
that is the committee of reference for elections bills, so unlike other issues, it's not quite as much of a red flag.
And I know that it's a committee of 5 of the 3 Democrats on the committee are supportive of the bill, so it will get out of committee.
Good job.
And on Wednesday, you said it's going on Wednesday?
It's going to be heard in committee on Wednesday, yes.
It seems like a pretty common sense bill. Do you think that other legislators are thinking the same thing, that this will pass easily?
It will be interesting to see. I mean, we're just starting to have those conversations, so we've
Yeah.
started talking to Senate State Affairs. Haven't talked to all the members yet, but we're certainly hopeful, and we think it's an important issue, but it's very partisan in the legislature sometimes. So it'll be interesting to see how, even an issue about lying to voters, how that'll play as it moves.
Do you have any statistics on how much that has occurred, aside from just anecdotal, versus how much actual voter fraud that hasn't occurred?
You mean in terms of the fraudulent information about elections, that the
Versus
deceptive
somebody
practices?
else, any voting that isn't eligible?
Yeah, we don't have, we've seen no proof that people are voting who aren't eligible,
Right,
and
but that's been a big noise
Right.
for nothing for the last
Yes.
decade.
And even when there's been voter fraud that's been convicted, it's been people voting in multiple places. So it's not the kind of thing that a photo ID would stop. It's someone who is registered in one place wants to vote someplace else. It's that kind of thing. But no, we haven't seen too much. And then on the deceptive practices piece, Senator Aguilar's bill, we've heard anecdotes about it happening in various places. Haven't seen a lot of it in Colorado though. So we're hopeful that we can get out ahead of it so that if it does happen, we've got a response ready.
And there actually was just a conviction in Maryland, right?
Right.
Of an assistant to the Attorney General, I believe.
I think it's the governor who was running, or
Who had authorized a robocall with false information.
right.
And he actually got convicted in that state.
Right, because they were able to prove that that was, intending to suppress the vote. It was targeted,
Yeah.
saying.
It was targeted in an African-American community. I know, it's really sort of sad, the things that you have to watch out for. I mean, I think voting is one of those things all of us wish more people would do, and anything that keeps people from doing it, who are legitimate, of course, is concerning. And it's interesting, when I heard voter ID, before I learned more about it from Common Cause and other organizations, I always thought it was sort of an anti-immigrant thing, but it turns out that actually it's elderly and African Americans who are more often affected by it. It's not as much Hispanics. And I think the case that's being taken to the Supreme Court on this involves a woman who was born on her farm in Wisconsin, an elderly white woman who has no ID and now can't vote because she doesn't have a voter ID in Wisconsin.
And it can be incredibly difficult if you're not in the system to get in and be able to document your identity. So the safeguards we have, which Colorado law has, you can use a photo ID, but it also allows you to use a whole set of other documents, and that's because when we put the ID law into place, the state took the language from the Help America Vote Act at the federal level, which gives people who don't have photo ID other options for voting. So in some ways our law, we're quite lucky in that we have a lot of options, but there are constantly attacks to limit that.
And doesn't that include like a bill from Excel or your phone
Yeah, you can
company or
use your
something?
utility bill, you can use if you've got a government paycheck or another government document. There's a whole set of things that you can use if you don't have your photo ID.
Any other questions?
Well, this is a good Sam part.
That's right, okay. I'm gonna pass these around and you can take one or not depending on how averse you are to paper. And this is a Citizen's Guide to the Colorado General Assembly. And if you open it up, it tells you how a bill becomes law in Colorado. And so what Elena was talking about was that, so basically somebody has, this says House, but we'll pretend it starts with Senate. So I talked with Common Cause and we came up with this idea for a bill, and as a legislator I'm allowed up to 5 bills per year if I want to introduce. And so I gave my bill title to the attorneys, and they helped me draft the bill to do what it was I wanted it to do. And it gets read across the table in the Senate and assigned to committee. And then it comes out like this. So it gets a bill number, you know, who's sponsoring it and what committee it's assigned to. Every bill in Colorado has to be heard in front of a committee. It doesn't, unfortunately, there's no way to be sure it's a fair hearing. And a lot of the killing of bills happens at that very first step, where they choose to send it to a committee where they know that it will be killed. Or they choose to send it to a committee where they know it'll be easy to get it out. It can work in both directions. So the bill will be heard in the committee where the bill was started. So in my case, Senate Bill 147 will have its first hearing tomorrow on Wednesday. If it passes out of committee, it goes to the floor of the Senate for second reading. And on second reading, you present your bill and any changes that were made in committee to the rest of the legislature. And you have to get the vote of, well, it's actually just a verbal vote. So if it sounds like more people are saying yes than no, people usually know in advance which ones are, you'll hear a loud no's if there's no's. And if somebody's saying, I don't believe this bill really passed, they'll cry division, and then you have to count. But in general, it's just a voice vote, and it passes or not. Now, a lot of legislators, after it comes out of committee, if they know that they're not going to be able to get people to support it enough to get it through, they might never bring it up for a second reading and let it just lay over. Or they might go up front and say, I'm going to lay this over until next year, meaning they're pulling the bill. After second reading, it comes back for a recorded vote. And in that case, all the legislators have to write down whether they're voting yes or no on the bill. And that's called third reading. And in order to get out of the Senate, because there are 35 of us, you need 18 yeses. And so if you have 18 yeses and it gets out of the Senate, it goes over to the other house, in this case the House, and the same process is repeated. It's read across the table, it's assigned to a committee. If the speaker, who happens to be a Republican, doesn't like your bill, the committee it's assigned to is State Veterans and Military Affairs, or some other committee where he knows it won't make it out. And then it gets a hearing in committee, and again, if it passes, it goes for a second reading on the floor, and then the counted reading, third reading on the floor of the House. The House has 65 members, so you need 33 people to vote yes for it to come out of the House. If it comes out of the House, it then goes to the governor, and the governor has to sign it, and then it becomes a law. The bill will either say that it becomes a law immediately upon signature of the governor or 90 days after the governor signs it. The immediately is a safety clause if you say something is immediately necessary for the health and welfare of the people versus we can wait 90 days and then have this law come into effect. Now that's sort of the very basics of how a bill becomes law. And so people say you need 18, 33, and 1. 18 votes in the House, in the Senate, 33 votes in the House, and the governor's signature to have your bill become a law. If the governor vetoes the bill, the legislature can choose to take it up again and override the governor's veto. It doesn't happen very often. I think you need a 2/3 vote in the House and a 2/3 vote in the Senate to override a governor veto. And it's interesting last year because Governor Hickenlooper had come from city government, where I'm told in city government as a mayor in Denver, you're pretty much a king. Well, at state government, you're one of 3 people who makes a decision. And so he had put some things in and somebody wanted to teach him a lesson and we overrode one of his vetoes. But it was just something minor on the budget in terms of a report he required or something. So, so that's the basics of how it goes. So with that in mind, then, the elections bill is going to its hearing in committee on Wednesday. The Good Samaritan bill was heard in committee last week, and it passed on second reading today, and we'll probably have third and final passage tomorrow, and then go over to the House of Representatives. And then the other bill that I had, a simple bill around guardianship, people who are guardians for kids with disabilities being able to be their care providers underneath a certain Medicaid waiver program. That bill was pretty simple, and that went through second and thirds already, and is hopefully today or tomorrow being read over in the House of Representatives. So that's how it happens.
Do you